I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Why is that? This is one of the times when I think Paul is right on the money. I don't always agree with Paul. I don't always understand Paul. Sometimes he's brilliant, and sometimes he's incomprehensible. Sometimes he's just plain odd. But in this point, I think he catches on to something key. I do not always do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Why is that? Is it the devil made me do it? Is it force of habit? Is it we don't know any better? Is it all three or none of them? I was never good at writing multiple choice questions. For Paul, this whole dialogue, this dialogue in Romans 6, 7, and 8 is a discussion about the law. Actually, much of Romans is a discussion about the law. And Paul never is saying that the law leads us to do what is wrong. Paul never says the law is a bad thing. For Paul, as for many, if not all, Jewish thinkers, the law is a gift from God. A gift from God to help us understand how we're supposed to live. And yet Paul is also well aware that we don't do what we know we're supposed to. We don't choose the good all the time. Later thinkers, Augustine, Luther, Calvin, would say that we're incapable of choosing the good, because sinfulness has such a hold on our souls and our psyche and our way of being that we are unable to make any other choice. I don't think that's where Paul goes. I don't think Paul goes that far. That's why I wrestle with doctrines like original sin or total depravity. But still, Paul hits something on the head when he says, we know better, but we do different. Paul also understands that the life in Christ is a life which sets us free, which transforms us to do better. There's a piece in More Voices that says, "Take, oh take me as I am. Summon out what I shall be. Set your seal upon my heart and live in me." To me, it captures in those 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, depending how you divide it, that conundrum of knowing that we could be better, knowing that Christ calls us to be better, knowing that God is transforming us, and yet knowing that we're not there yet. I think Paul's lengthy discussion, and as I say, this is a section from 3 chapters. 6, 7, and 8 are all almost one continuous explanation. Explication, description of what it means to be of the law, but also of grace, of being transformed, of being set free from sin. But I think what Paul's describing here fits very well with our modern discussions of systemic racism. Because what Paul describes when he describes sin and how it enslaves humanity is a structure which you don't even know you're part of, which is so much a part of your life that binds you up in such ways that you don't even recognize it. And so you can't escape. That's what systemic racism is in modern society. Systemic racism are those assumptions we don't know we've got. Those things we just do because they've always been done. One of my options earlier was the devil made me do it. I'm not big on that one. I'm not big on the devil, per se. But the second one was force of habit. Force of habit. Habits are powerful things. They're hard to break. They're hard even sometimes to recognize with God because they become just the way life is. Systemic racism is a habit. It's a habit we don't always know we've got. It's a habit of our whole culture. And it leads us to not do the good we know we should. Because we don't even recognize we're not doing it. It's that thing which binds us up. What we're being called to do by our neighbors who are using phrases like Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter. Okay, I haven't actually heard that last one, but systemic racism against Asians is a long-standing feature of Canadian culture. Is to stop and see the habits. To recognize what it is that is enslaving us and binding us up. And sometimes it seems like we just can't get anywhere because we're only one individual, or we're only one group of people, or we're just a small subsection. And sometimes we just know how hard it is to change a habit, to change our thinking, to change our assumptions. But the other part of Paul's argument, the other part of living in Christ, is the argument that we're being transformed. John Wesley, founder of Methodism, spoke at great length about the doctrine of sanctification. He had a doctrine out which was actually called Towards Christian Perfection. It's worth pointing out that for Wesley, if you ever said, I've achieved Christian perfection, it meant you were right back at the beginning and had to start over. Because you were obviously not humble. But the doctrine of sanctification within Christian thought is that we're being changed. We're being made better. We're being given the power to make better choices. In our gospel reading today, come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. The knowledge that we do not do what we want, but do the very thing we hate, gets very heavy at times. The knowledge that we live in a world where some people have more privileges than others for reasons that make no sense. The color of their skin, their sexual identity, their gender, their religion, their language, their accent. Can be heavy at times, especially when we recognize that we're the ones with the privilege. When we recognize the unfairness of having that privilege. Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, Christ says, and I will give you rest. We come to Christ where we can lay down that fact that the world's not right, the fact that we don't always do what we want, the fact that we sometimes do the very thing we hate. We lay that in Christ, who helps us carry the burden, who helps relieve the weight off our shoulders. Take my yoke upon you. As Christ lifts up the weight of those burdens that don't do anything for us anymore. Christ shoulders another yoke with us. The yoke is that thing which would tie two oxen together so that they would pull and share the load of the wagon. assuming they both pulled evenly. The yoke Christ lays upon us is that being transformed into new people. Being transformed into people who make different choices. Christ never says, come, sit down, have a rest. You don't have to do anything else. He says, come sit down. I'm going to help you along the way. Take a rest now. And then continue the path. And this yoke is easy because I'm carrying it with you. We don't get transformed by ourselves. We don't come up with a whole new way of viewing the world by ourselves. If we did that, we'd be relegated to our habits and our patterns and our old way of being. But in Christ we are transformed. We are set free from those things that enslave us. That is good news. Friends, I invite you to join in letting God transform us and through us the world. Take, O take me as I am. Summon out what I shall be. Set your seal upon my heart and live in me. With God's transforming power, we can end the ills of the world. Systemic racism, prejudice, discrimination, excessive privilege, uneven privilege. With Christ carrying the yoke, pulling along beside us, all things are possible. Thanks be to God. Amen.